Hello YouTube, I've got a new video today about how to repair cracks in plaster. It's a bit different from my last video because that plaster was completely gone, so I had to kind of rip off a lot of the plaster and I used a chisel to do it. Whereas this one, I've had a number of issues with this wall where I painted it and the cracks just keep on reappearing because essentially the plaster all the way through to the brickwork will have cracks. No matter how much you bond it or paint it, the movement of the plaster is going to cause the cracks to come back. So the only real way to remedy this is either take all the plaster off or try and fix the cracks. Now what I'm going to do this is a little bit different from last time. I've got a oscillating tool which I'm going to dig out these cracks. These cracks are actually, they're quite micro cracks, you couldn't even see them, but I've scored them out so I know where they are. So this is actually me scoring them. I'm going to use a oscillating tool to cut through, right through to the brickwork. The reason I'm doing that is because it won't disturb the rest of the plaster which I want to keep. And then I'll be spraying some glue to settle it and then get some sort of, I haven't decided what yet, but some sort of bonding paste or flexible bonding paste that I can sand rather than plaster that will go to fill the gap. So I've done a little test yesterday to see what kind of thickness the oscillating tool is going to cut into the plaster because I don't want to disrupt this too much. So as you can see, it's not too bad there. And I have a little bit of a technique to get the glue in there, which I'll show you now. So I've made a little PVA water glue solution, put it in this container, any old container, and put a little hole in the top, which is just as thick as a needle, but that allows me to squirt in the hole as much as I can, because I want that to basically get as much glue as I can in there, just to kind of ideally seal it up, but obviously kind of create some sort of bond between this loose plaster and the back of the wall, which would stop any cracks coming back. So the aim of today is just to chase out all of this crack. There's quite a lot of it. I think this is an exterior wall and obviously the window doesn't help. So they're all over the wall, as you can see there. Apply the glue, apply the bonding paste, and then paint it. And that should be that then. So this is my oscillating tool. Such a universal tool this, you can so many applications for it. But for today, as you can see, it's going to be so as you can see, it creates a really small crack there. But with this bottle, should be okay. Just needs a lot of cleanup. So naturally quite a few bits may fall out, but it's not a problem. I'm just going to cover everything in glue and we can fill that when complete. This is probably a 50-50 mix of water and glue. I'll see how it is. I might actually make a thicker mix and put it in there, but this should really do. I mean, obviously a lot of this plaster is going to be off behind, so to prevent any future cracks, I want it to be as fluid as possible to go down the back and seal as much as possible. But ultimately it's going to be some sort of bonding compound in there, flexible bonding compound. I probably won't use plaster or filler. I want something a bit more bespoke than that. But this obviously helps keep everything kind of nice and tight and unlikely to re-crack if it penetrates as much as possible. So I'm making some good progressions, quite a lot of cracks in this wall. I mean, you could barely see them before, you'd see them in the paint. As you can see, I've peeled off a lot of the paint because I hadn't adhered to the plaster very well. So kind of in for a penny, in for a pound, and scraped it off. Obviously it looks a lot worse than it did now because I've opened it up. But essentially those cracks will never go until you do something like this. They just reappear and make the finished products looked pretty awful, to be honest. So I always planned to do this. So I thought I'll just go for every crack I can see, which is pretty much everything you can see here. So I've only got this wall left to go. So this is all the cracks chased out now, so not too bad. It's quite good using that oscillating tool because didn't cause any further cracks. All of these have been applied with the 50/50 PVA water glue. So all that's left now is for filling and painting. So I went to Wix to see what was the best product. I didn't want to use normal filler or plaster because I figured well, it might not crack, but I wanted something specifically for this job. So you can get different types. You can get ready mixed and ones you've got to mix yourself. So polyfiller all purpose, but the main thing is they won't shrink or crack. So you can get, like I said, you get different types of this. You get the real cheap Wix one that's you've got to mix yourself. You get this one. You get a similar one to this that's already mixed, but obviously I want to use this for future projects as well. So you just, as per the instructions there, like I said, the main thing is that it won't shrink or crack, and it can penetrate more than just 2mm, which some of them are for fine crack repair, whereas it's obviously quite deep crack repair, and in some places, full-on filler. So for this mix, it's 2 to 2.5 mix of polyfiller to 1 water, so just use a little jar, and we'll see what that ends up looking like. So you want about 2.5 to 1 of water to give this kind of nice thick paste. Anything more than that I think is just too runny. And try and squeeze it because these are quite deep, these holes. These cutouts. So because these cutouts are quite deep, I'm going to try and push all the way in to increase that bonding. Okay, that's the first application applied. A bit messy because I let my 4-year-old daughter help me, but all good. A bit of a sponge off and scrape off. I always find I have to put a second layer in to get it completely smooth because when you put the sponge over it, it kind of causes an indentation a little bit. But yeah, that's all completed. So just one last little coat to make it smooth. Bit of a sand, paint, and then all done. So this is the second coat that I'm now going to rub down. This had a lot higher water mix, which means it's much more likely to get a flat finish against the wall. When you have like a dry finish, you kind of pull that palette knife and it kind of pulls it away from the edge. Equally, if you use a sponge, it then kind of rubs it away. So I tend to have a little bit of an excess there, sand it down to get a nice smooth finish, rather than try and get it first time on the actual palette. So we're all done now, nice and flat and ready to paint. Get a nice mist coat on there first, and then we are all done. So there's no cracks in this wall whatsoever. So it might seem like a bit of a kind of an overreaction to dig it out this much, but pretty much this is the only way you're going to get rid of the cracks. If you paint over or if you do a slight filler, they're just going to return. So this is the only way really. But what I'll do is I'll finish the video with the finished completed painted wall and show you how it looks. So now we're going to do the mist coat, which should be 3 parts paint to 1 part water. This is very much an estimation, but the main point of that is so that the plaster is going to absorb water from the paint. So if you don't put too excess water in it, it's going to absorb it directly from the paint as it is, and it's going to peel off. So you put the extra water in to allow for that absorption, and then the rest of the paint can stick to the wall and act as a base for the future full coat of paint. So this is the mist coat on. It's interesting that when you put a mist coat on, it really shows up some of the damage. So I've got to put a little bit more filler just to kind of fill some of these little kind of grooves that will cause when I was taking the paint off. But yeah, mist coat all on. So once those little grooves and little dents have been filled, ready for the final coat, and no more cracks. So I've just put another layer of polyfiller just to fill all the really small cracks. Any old wall, over the years you pick up little cracks and little kind of scores where maybe you pulled off the plaster or the paint from before. And I kind of, whilst I'm doing the work on this wall, I want to get it as flat as possible. So it might seem a bit excessive, but I've got the time to do it. These are just filling really tiny little cracks and little divots and little holes. Equally where I've scraped off the paint and we have bare plaster and old paint, there's always a bit of a lip. Even if you sand it down, there's still a bit of a lip between the old paint and the new paint. So I always find you've got to put a bit of filler to bridge that gap. It doesn't seem to make a difference how much you sand it. The only big difference here is that because we've got the plaster here, it's really nice and flat. And obviously the old paint, you always pick up a bit of a grain from the brush or the roller. And I kind of really want to make it as flat as possible. So I might have to give that a sand, or if I roll it, it'll put a texture on the whole thing. But I quite like the smooth finish. So there really is a lot to think about when you're trying to blend in an old paint to new paint. But yeah, I want it as flat as possible. So I think I'm going to sand this, and then hopefully the paint will bridge the gap between the two. So that's the wall all sanded smooth, and time for the final coat of paint. So I've got slightly watered down paint for this. I'm going to brush it on because for this wall I kind of really want a nice flat finish. So I don't want that textured finish that you'd get with a roller. So you can kind of paint it on, paint through the excess stripes, and you get a nice flat finish. So we're all done. We've got the first coat on there, which I brushed on. I think I'll probably put one more coat on, but essentially for the purpose of this video, just showing you how you repair cracks in the wall, we're all done.